Hi all, my name is Bobby Adier. I'm the Dean here at Texas A&M School of Law. It's a great honor to welcome you all here and to welcome the Texas Tribune and this distinguished panel of guests speaking on what really is a very vital topic for us in higher education. At A&M, this has been a central focus. We're proud of the fact that we have the highest six-year graduation rate here in the state, but aren't resting on our laurels in that regard. One of the biggest initiatives of the university at the moment is a new student success initiative that is driven in significant part by what we like to say, which is that there's no better financial support you can give to a student by way of scholarship or financial aid than enabling them to graduate on time or early. And so anything we can do in that regard as a system of higher education is hugely valuable and vital. We have a great panel to gather. I'm excited to learn from it. And again, we're excited to have you here at Texas A&M School of Law. But let me hand it off to Shannon to take us forward. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dean Adier. Thank you to the Texas A&M University School of Law for hosting us. Can you hear okay? Okay. On behalf of the Tribune, I'm so excited to welcome you to this conversation about completion in higher education. We have a fantastic panel here to talk about the completion conundrum, about what strategies work, and about if the legislature can afford the price of success. There are a couple of housekeeping matters just before we get going. First, a huge thank you to Tyler Gately for his help in organizing this event. Thank you to our sponsors for this event, Pearson, Educate Texas, the Trellis Foundation, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Lumina Foundation, and the Sid Richardson Foundation. Thank you to our media partners, KERA, WFAA, Culture Map Dallas, the Shorthorn, and the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. Though donors and corporate sponsors underwrite our events, they play no role in determining the content, panelists, or line of questioning. We're nearly done now. As a nonprofit newsroom, the Texas Tribune relies on members to help keep our stories free and our events open to the public. That means that all of our journalism, including events like this one, are made possible by folks just like you. Become a member before 6 p.m. tonight at texastribune.org/join, and you'll help us unlock $10,000 in matching funds and ensure we can continue to inform and engage with communities across our state. Okay, please silence your phones. If you're inclined to tweet, please feel free to use the hashtag TTEvents. And with that, please join me in welcoming our panelists. On the far left, we have Dr. Vistap Karbari. He has been president of the University of Texas at Arlington since 2013. During his tenure, UT Arlington has achieved Carnegie R1 status and has been ranked as a top educational institution in the state for veterans and for adult learners. Thank you for being here, Dr. Karbari.
Thank you very much.
Next to him, Dr. Millicent Valek. She has been president of Brazosport College since 1996, during which time the college was twice named one of the top 10 community colleges in the nation by the Aspen Institute, and we'll probably let her explain why they've earned that distinction. Finally, thank you for being here. Finally, we have Dr. Raymond Paredes. For 15 years, Commissioner Paredes has been the state's top higher education official, heading the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board. He'll be stepping down but not retiring at the end of August. Thank you all for being here, and please join me in welcoming the panelists. We're going to do about 40 minutes of questions from me, 20 minutes of questions from you, the audience, and we're going to have Commissioner Paredes tee us up for this conversation, if you don't mind, sir. Your agency oversees the state's strategic plan for higher education, 60 by 30. How is the state doing in terms of getting students through college, and how does completion fit into the goals laid out in 60 by 30?
Well, I'll answer the last question first. The fact is it's all about completion. The two primary goals of 60 by 30 Texas are, number one, that we have 60% of our young adults, 25 to 34, achieve some sort of post-secondary credential by then, certificate, associate's degree, or bachelor's degree. And we want, by the year 2030, to be graduating 550,000 students a year from all our institutions of higher education, those categories I mentioned a moment ago. We are on track to achieve those ambitious goals. Right now, we're at about 42% of our youngest cohort of adults have some form of post-secondary credential. To give you an idea of how far behind we are compared to other states, the leading states, they passed 60% a long time ago. We send about 53% of our high school graduates to college. Massachusetts sends over 70%. And that kind of deficit, that kind of disparity accumulates over time and makes us very uncompetitive in certain fields. There's a reason why Silicon Valley is where it is. And we have to make some major changes in educational achievement in Texas in order to be able to compete at that level. Let me give you a couple of important data points. Right now, our universities, our 37 public universities in Texas have a overall 6-year graduation rate of about 61%. That's right at the national average. But if we take UT Austin and Texas A&M out of the calculation, because those are by far the two most selective institutions in the state and by far the two largest institutions in the state. If we take A&M and UT Austin out of the calculation, our 6-year graduation rates for the other 35 public universities is right around 51%. That to me is deplorable. I think we've got some challenges to overcome. I think, for example, the way we fund higher education encourages, and I'm talking about universities for the moment, I'll make a distinction between those and community colleges. Right now, we fund universities almost entirely on the basis of enrollment. We take a census on the 12th class day, and whatever students are enrolled, those are the students that a university gets funded for. Whatever happens to them after the 12th class day has absolutely no impact on enrollment, and we're trying to change that. In community colleges, our 6-year completion rates are about 32%. That's achieving an associate's degree, achieving a workforce certificate, or transferring to a university in the low 30s. Now, that's the bad news. The good news is community colleges have improved in those categories by 26% in 4 years since we implemented outcomes-based funding. That's one of the reasons we're pushing very hard to do the same thing for universities. I'll stop there.
Well, I wonder if either of you want to kind of build on some of Dr. Paredes's points, but I have a question that I'll just put to you as you think about your answers. When you look at your own campus, what do you view as student success? And when you look at your student body, do you think that 4- and 6-year graduation rates are the best metric of how your students are faring?
So I'm glad you asked the question. Thank you very much, because it tees up my answer. So with all due respect to everyone who graduated in 4 years or in 6 years, that doesn't represent our full population. And while I'll be the first to say that we do need a lot of our students to graduate in 4 or in 6 years, we have a large percentage of the population that fits into 2 categories that is not counted in that metric at all. The first is transfer students. So about 50% of the population at the University of Texas at Arlington comes in as transfer students. Their graduation rates aren't counted in the federal graduation rate of 4 and 6 year, because in order to be counted, you have to be within the cohort that is first time in college. And so we need to keep in mind that a significant percentage of our students, and it should be that way because we have a great 2-year college system, and if we're truly going to leverage the resources that the state have, we have to make sure that we allow for that path as well. The second is, we've always talked in terms of traditional students. The 18 to 24-year-old who comes directly out of high school and goes on to college, spends 4 to 6 years, and then will move on to a job. If you look at the demographics today, a large percentage of the population doesn't fit into that 18 to 24. Or if they are within the 18 to 24 range, they have a lot of other responsibilities as well. They may be the sole caregiver for their family. They have families of their own. They're running businesses. And we have to keep in mind that for those students, a 4-year degree or a 6-year degree isn't in their plan. And it isn't in the plan because life is also going to take place side by side. It's not just the money we give them for a scholarship. It's the money for their parents. It's the healthcare benefits. It's running sort of a company on the side. They can't put all that on hold, whatever be the benefit in the long run, in order to graduate. And that's what the University of Texas at Arlington has been really focusing on, is how do we make sure that our students who come in as traditional students, and I hate to use that word, because at UTA, we don't have a traditional student. We have a diversity of students. We have the 18-year-old who comes straight from high school. They're very high achieving. In fact, the percentage who come to us who are in the top 10% and the top 25% in their graduating class is the highest of the emerging research universities. But we also have a tremendous number who come through the community college system. And they are very, very motivated. They want to do the right thing, but they're not traditional. We have a lot who come from, let's say, veterans. It's approximately 11% of our population are veterans or are military serving. That's a totally different demographic, and what we need to do for them is totally different. So when we talk about completion and we talk about student success, we actually talk about it in two different ways. The first is in terms of degree attainment. We want to make sure that our students actually progress at the right pace for them, and we're going to try to push them to make it as quickly as possible, but we keep in mind that their defined pace might be a little different than the standard defined pace. How do we get them to a degree that is going to give them not only the knowledge that we wish they have in terms of academia, we want them to have this broad breadth of knowledge. We want them to be learned citizens of the state. But we also want to make sure that they have the skills to be ready to go into the workforce and be successful. And so last year we graduated 13,700 students. The year before we graduated 12,700. The year before it was about 11,500. We've increased our degree attainment by 48% over the last 5 years. That's not 4-year or 6-year. We've also increased our 4-year and 6-year graduation rates by about 7% or 8% over the same time period. But degree attainment is the first thing that we look at in terms of student success because it gets the student past the threshold. The second is the progression of the student towards that degree. It's not just getting a degree. Are they progressing towards the degree at the right pace? And for some of them, absolutely, it should be 3 years, 3.5 years, 4 years. For some, it should be somewhere between 5 and 6. And for some, it's going to be 8 years. We used to have a lot of students who went to night school, and we celebrated their success. And for us across the state, we need to figure out the different mechanisms that allow us to push for that 4-year and 6-year graduation rate, pay a lot of attention to our transfer students so that we can make sure that when they come to us from the 2-year colleges, that they continue progressing towards their goals. And we also take the other populations that we tend to forget and make sure they get our degrees. And so student success to me means getting a degree, but then having a job at the end so that the debt that we might have from our students is, number one, as low as possible, and two, it is not that high that they spend the first 10, 15, 20 years of their lives trying to pay back debt.
We can talk more about strategies in a moment, but Dr. Val, tell us about your students, please.
Oh, I'd be happy to. Can you hear me? Okay, wonderful. Well, first of all, I think what you just heard described for UT Arlington student body is very typical of community college sectors. We have a very diverse student population, and 76% of students at the 50 Texas community colleges are attending part-time. I know at my own institution that demographic is 80%. So it takes a lot of sustainability and retention efforts to get those students to degree completion. But they get there. They are some of the most amazing people I've ever met in my life. Their tenacity is there. And so we look for ways to support that tenacity, to keep their student debt low, to look at those wraparound services. I think community colleges as a sector really believe in the value and the important message that 60 by 30 has set for Texas, because it's a moral imperative. It's also an economic imperative. And our large focus on both transfer and workforce entry puts us in a seat where we have the best strategy for helping Texas beat generational poverty. We take that very seriously. And when we look at performance-based funding mechanisms that the commissioner raised, the community college sector embraced that. And the reason we embrace that is yes, the end goal of completion is the ultimate goal, but there are so many milestones along the way, as you were discussing. So we look at rewarding a student being college ready, getting out of that developmental sequence, completing 15 hours, completing 30 hours, completing their first college level math course, successfully transferring, getting a certificate, getting a degree. All of those are very important milestones along the way because that's what leads to that completion. And that's how I define student success.
That's fantastic. Well, let's just stay on you for a moment. You brought up the outcomes-based funding that Dr. Paredes had brought up. What other strategies have you seen work on your campus?
We've seen two strategies in particular that have been very useful for our students. I know a lot of people are probably not even familiar with where Brazosport College is located, but we are one of the Gulf Coast colleges, and we're about 50 miles south of Houston. So we're in the middle of a manufacturing complex with some large major industries there. Companies like Dow Chemical, BASF, liquefied natural gas, those sorts of companies. And as you are probably aware, there's a renaissance going on in that industry. And so the job opportunities there are abundant, and the wages that they bring are amazing. And so we have had a long history of partnership with our industry partners, and they are on our campus on a daily basis. They support our students with scholarships. They provide mentors. They provide internships. They provide resources. And that has been a big strategy that has been helpful. In return, when we look at the students' earning power on the end of that, we're looking at some of the highest labor market outcomes in the nation for two-year graduates. So that's a strong magnet for a student to stay and persist, even if it takes more than 4 years or 6 years to earn a two-year degree. The return on investment is huge. And that kind of industry support has allowed our college to have a goal of eventually getting to where very few, if any, of our students graduate with debt. Right now, 16% of our students have debt when they graduate. That's compared to the statewide average of 34%. And we've made a lot of progress on that by increasing our scholarship programs and our outreach to financial aid. And so that, I think that's an attainable goal for us in the next 10 years. I really do. The other strategy is the one I want to say that I'm most excited about, and that at this point in our history, and that is a laser level focus on how we advise students. You know, think about being a first generation college student and entering the higher ed world where there's a foreign language that no one understands. Who's ever heard of a registrar before, or a syllabus, or, and the litany goes on, and then being asked to navigate through that without a guide at your side. So about 4 years ago, we took on the effort of deciding that every faculty member and every administrator at the college would have a group of students that they would be coaching. And we have augmented that with technology, and that they would see the same person consistently over 4 semesters, and that we would train everyone in how to do that kind of coaching role. Well, we're at a point in that innovation now where we will be at scale this fall. That means that all of those employees will have been through the professional development training, and every first time in college student will have a coach. Our early data is very promising. We looked at have been following a 2017 cohort and have seen a 27% increase in retention over 3 semesters in that amount of time. And you know, persistence is what it's all about if you want to get to completion.
Dr. Karbari, I wonder if you can tell us about your experience at UT Arlington. And there's 2 themes that Dr. Valek mentioned that I'd like you to pick up on if possible: the use of technology and helping to meet workforce needs.
Absolutely, and they're very important things to keep in mind because the situation has changed over the last 20 years. So when we look at the use of technology, one of the things that we've been able to do very well is to use technology in 3 different ways. And I'd like to go over those 3. The first is that it is actually possible to have agreements with the community colleges where we share transcripts from day one. And one of the things we have is an agreement with TCC that is called UTA by TCC. And so a student coming into a community college over there on day one, if they say that they might want to go to UTA, and we need to get their agreement because of FERPA and make sure we're not forcing them to do something that they don't want to do, but once they say they want to do it, then that record is actually shared between our advisors and their advisors from day one. And that means there is a congruence of advising, and we're using technology then in order to make that possible. So the records are not just transferred, but also the type of advice that is given is the same on both sides. That's the easy use of technology. The second use of technology is on the online side. And we've done a tremendous amount at the University of Texas at Arlington to provide online classes and online programs to our students. Now, I should rush to emphasize, online programs don't mean just putting a PowerPoint slide up or a talking head. These are very well-developed programs that have intensive education that goes on at a level that is probably higher than what some students will see in class. And so when you look at a student in class and you have a lot of students, and I'm sure 50% of the audience fits into this, we were shy. We sat at the back of the class, or we sat in front of the class with our eyes down, hoping that the instructor wouldn't call on us to answer a question. Well, guess what? When you're online, that shyness disappears. And if I'm not responding, then the instructor, through the use of technology, can contact me to say, have you actually done the following things? Are you keeping track of the things that are going on? Can I pinpoint what you need to do to catch up because you seem to be behind? Supplemental material can be provided at the right point in time. So when we talk about online, we shouldn't all be thinking about MOOCs, and we shouldn't all be thinking about thousands of students looking at a PowerPoint slide. This is education at a new level, and we've been able to do it for the working adult. So we've done it in the area of nursing, for example, where we have a large number of nurses that finish their associate's degrees at the community colleges. They get an RN, and then they need a degree while they're actually working in hospitals. All of us, especially those of us with a little bit of gray hair, are going to want those nurses to be at the hospitals and not stop serving over there because then we wouldn't get the health care we want. We've managed with the use of technology to form partnerships with hospitals and healthcare systems across the state of Texas so that we can continue a very high level of education for those students. We're doing the same thing at the master's degree level in the area of education. And we have teachers who are already teaching who need to come back and get an MEd. That's the second use of technology. The third use of technology is in the general area of what we term as intrusive advising. And I want to be careful. Intrusive doesn't mean forcing yourself on the student. It means being able to pinpoint where the student is having difficulties. So we have a program that we use at the University of Texas at Arlington that actually maps the progress of every student. It's known as Civitas. And there are a variety of different programs that other universities use as well. But what we do is track the progress of every single student. When does a student start doing badly? What are the core classes at which a student is likely to face a problem? So these might be gateway classes, but how do we then figure out what we need to do, and we intervene proactively rather than waiting for a student to do badly before we jump in. And this is used by our faculty. It's also used by a student. And so by using learning analytics and using data the right way, we're actually able to augment what we're doing in terms of face-to-face advising by having a lot of data that we can bring to bear so that we can increase student success. And this is where technology goes a great way. And we can do that then in figuring out what are the workforce needs and then trying to fill the workforce needs very rapidly because they're not depending on archaic systems. So for example, we decided that we were going to start a degree in architectural engineering because there was a huge need for that in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. Large amount of construction that goes on. From start to finish, that degree took us a year to actually develop. and have in place. And obviously, THECB had a lot to do with it in terms of helping us put together the right things. But we were able to do it because we used technology the right way. We were also able to do it because we saw a workforce need, and we developed things to fill that workforce need, which is exactly what we need to do in the state of Texas.
Commissioner Paredes, you have a statewide approach. What strategies do you think are scalable, and what can the coordinating board or the legislature do to help with that?
The first thing I would say is that we know that performance-based funding works. It's having a very strong and healthy impact on our two-year institutions. It's working very well, not only at community colleges, but technical colleges as well. So we think it's very important to implement performance-based funding at the university level as well. The second thing I would point out is that a lot of the best practices don't cost extra money. For example, I can't always remember the distinction between and among the Florida institutions, but it's either Central Florida or Florida Southern or one of the new mega Florida universities. But they had a double-digit increase in graduation at that institution. And according to the president, the main factor in getting that jump, that very significant jump in completions, was that they required, when possible, for faculty members to hold office hours immediately after class. Now, anybody who's ever taught would say, of course that would work. Of course that would have an impact. Because the longer students wait to get help, the less likely it is they'll actually get it. So if a student has a question about something that was discussed in class, and the professor says, all right, if anybody has any questions, come see me right now. We can talk on the way to my office. That can have a huge impact. We know, for example, that faculty members, let me back up for a second. The Gallup poll people have done some extraordinary work in the past couple of years on higher education. They've come up with some striking information about why students drop out of college, what compels them to go back. You know what the number one reason that students drop out of college? They feel like the institution doesn't care about them. They've never been invited by a professor to talk about their work. They feel most of the time, they say in large public universities, faculty don't know our names. So we know that faculty who reach out to students, and for example, if a student writes a paper and gets a low grade, a D, and the professor says, let's talk in a non-judgmental way, let's just talk about how you can do better. That has a huge impact. Those are the kinds of things that we can do without extra cost. Now, the other thing to know about whether a new practice costs a lot of money, at Georgia State University, which is kind of the poster child for making rapid improvement in completion rates, what Georgia State University did was they committed, I think, about $450,000 about 10 years ago to improve learning outcomes. They bought some software, the predictive analytics that President Kabari talked about. They increased their number of advisors significantly. They gave the faculty training in effective pedagogy. They invested $450,000. And the president pointed out that 5 years later, they had recovered all that money because the Georgia Public University formula funding works very much like it does in Texas. They fund upper division courses at higher rates and lower division courses, and they fund students in STEM fields at higher rates in the humanities. And so they recovered that $450,000 in 5 years just because they were retaining students up into their upper division courses and graduating more students. Those are some of the things that we can do, but we've proposed, it's on the table right now. we propose that we put approximately $127 million into performance funding for universities. And we'd fund universities at higher levels on the basis of one simple difference in their performance: graduating more at-risk students. And we define those as being Pell eligible or having a lower than average SAT or ACT score. And we propose that for every student that's defined as being at risk, the universities receive a graduation supplement of $1,500, which will cover the cost of the extra help, like the advising that you talked about, like the tutoring that goes on at other colleges and universities. And we hope we can do that, but the evidence from around the country and from Texas is that funding on the basis of performance makes a huge difference in overall outcomes.
Well, you mentioned the graduation bonus, and down in Austin, we're in the middle of a legislative session. So I would like to get all three of your perspective on what proposals are on the table right now that could get funded, and what proposals should be on the table but are not.
I'll be glad to speak to that from the perspective of performance-based funding. When we went into this session, our single priority request was to increase the amount of money put into performance-based funding. And the reason for that is if you don't keep up with funding so that the value of that funding remains constant, it loses its efficacy as a program. And our legislature has not kept up with that over previous sessions. However, I'm guardedly optimistic that we have made a significant amount of progress this time, especially if you look at the numbers that are in the House Appropriations Bill. Now, there's some threats to that. You also know there's a lot of discussion going on about tax reform right now. And community colleges have a funding source that they rely on. That's an important part of our funding that comes from local taxes. Right now, there's a proposal that has two takes on it. One is the House version and one is the Senate version. In the Senate version, we are not exempted from the proposed rollback rate of 2.5%. If that were to prevail, that could wipe out the entire growth we've made in student success points in 1 year. So there's a lot at risk there. We are encouraged that in the House version, we are exempted as a sector. And it makes perfect sense because I know that tax relief is important, but I also know higher education is important to economic development. And if you look at the percent that of a person's tax bill, the community college portion of that is probably less than 5% of the whole bill. So the legislature has the means to provide relief for taxes and not have the unintended consequence of undoing a performance-based funding system or even causing tuition to rise for students who are least able to pay for it.
And are the local tax dollars about 40% of most community colleges?
They
funding?
vary all over from being 40% down to 10, 15%, because everybody's assessed valuation is very different across the state.
Okay, Dr. Karbari, how about you? Funding and perhaps some programmatic proposals that you'd like to see the legislature pursue.
Sure, so let me start by thanking the legislature because they have been focused on education in this session, and they've done a tremendous job so far in trying to pinpoint the needs that we have in supporting them. And even in the past, the growth that we've had at the University of Texas at Arlington, it's been a tremendous growth, about 25% over the last 5 years in terms of student population in the face-to-face population, has been because of the support that we've received. Outcomes-based funding, as long as it looks at the appropriate type of metrics, and the commissioner pointed out one, which was degree attainment, and then with a separation in terms of high risk. I think those are wonderful metrics because those are exactly what we need to look at. How are we graduating students that actually are going to go out into the workforce and be productive members of our society? I think that is a tremendous one to look at. The general topic of, let's say, transferability. That's definitely something we need to look at. It's perhaps a little sad that the legislature has to become involved, but it's a good thing that they're looking at the question and they're trying to help us with the community colleges and in terms of the four-year universities get together and make a headway in that. That's going to be tremendous for the rest of the state. The state puts in a huge amount of resources in terms of supporting the community college system, in terms of supporting the four-year college systems, and how do we best find synergy and leverage those so that our students can find pathways that are smooth from one to the other is absolutely terrific. And so things like that, I think, what the legislature are doing right now are right on point.
Before we turn it over to Commissioner Paredes, if the audience, if you guys have questions, now would be a good time to maybe stand up by the microphones. Please do ask a question with a question mark. Please don't make a speech, and we'll get to you all in the last 15, 20 minutes or so of this event. Okay, Commissioner Paredes, what do you think of what the legislature is doing, and what could they be doing more of?
I think one of the issues that we're tracking very closely is funding for Texas Grant. Texas Grant is most of you know, is the financial aid program for university students. And we've made some adjustments to it. For example, if you didn't have a Texas Grant when you were in a community college and you transfer to a university, you are now eligible to start receiving it. This is the first time that I can remember that legislative appropriations, both the House and the Senate bills, are not close, or not as close as they should be to what we asked for. And just as we are reaching a point where poor students are going to colleges and universities in far greater numbers, we're going to end up funding relatively fewer of them as a percentage of the whole. And I think that's a mistake. We're going to have to make some changes to stretch our financial aid dollars further, but I think the state has to make a larger investment in poor students.
Sir, would you like to go ahead and start us off with some questions from the audience?
Yes. Well, I honed my 44-page speech down to one page. So thanks to Dr. Paredes, I want to piggyback off of something he said, as well as ask a question regarding performance-based. And going on something also he said regarding the incentive to enroll students. Well, in this report here, the African-American male student is taking the brunt of that enrollment problem. You know, we're getting enrolled, but we're coming out of the side door of the universities as opposed to the other side of it. And I think it has a lot to do with the unwillingness to impose performance-based learning on the student as well as the institution. The children who will be 25 in 2030 are now 8th graders. They're 8th graders today. So I'm kind of wondering regarding getting this whole idea of performance on the student side, because what I'm noticing being in education and being in and out of schools, they're forcing the high-performing, and I'm just going to be frank and honest about it, they're forcing the high-performance African-American males to endure the ones who don't care. They're being forced to have to, the guys who don't want to learn, not interested, are setting I'm a little nervous here, so forgive me. They're setting what am I thinking of? When everybody's going in the same direction. What am I thinking of? My point is, how do we put some meat on the bones here? We see compete. I read in here, I see the word compete. I want to compete. I want to take bold steps. I don't just want it to be a situation where we're just going to say, okay, we're going to put all this money at it and get in where you fit in. How do we really change the dynamics of this whole situation to where the boys that we, all the euphemisms that we're using, poor kids, disadvantaged. I have 3 sons. I have a 14-year-old. He's in the 8th grade. He's going to be 25 in 2030. I have a 16-year-old. Okay, so you get my point.
Yeah, I think
How do we put some meat on the bones of this stuff?
maybe when you guys answer this question, so please address this question about the performance-based funding aspect of it. And maybe we can also talk about progress among different demographics of students and why it may not be equal.
The performance-based funding model that we're recommending would have a disproportionate positive impact on African American males, as it would on males in general, because there's disproportionately larger numbers of African American males and Latino males that are defined as being at risk. So we think if it passes, it would help address the issue that you talk about. But I don't think we fully appreciated what's happening in higher education. Males of any ethnicity now make up only 43% of college students. 57% are women. If that were an election, that would be called a landslide, that women are winning by a landslide. Now, I've raised this issue before, and I've been attacked by certain groups who say, given what women are undergoing right now in terms of sexual harassment, in terms of Article 9 complaints and so forth, that's probably not a good time to make the point. But the fact is, there is a real, serious problem in terms of male representation in higher education, and it's likely to become a crisis if we don't do something about it soon. We've got all kinds of problems. It's not just that so many African American males are performing at low levels, but there's been a lot of research that shows that for an awful lot of young African American men, doing well in school is not considered cool. Right, exactly. And we've got to do something about that. We've got to make sure that all young people understand the value of education, the value of learning. But I can tell you we are very much aware of this issue. We have recommended the one single metric for performance-based funding because of our understanding of the problem that you just, the challenge that you just addressed, and we're hoping to do something about it.
Shannon, if I may, I'd like to turn the conversation a little bit. But before I do that, since I have the mic, I do want to boast a little bit about UTA. We are the number 11 ranked school in the nation for degrees awarded to African Americans at the bachelor's degree level and the number 1 in the state of Texas. And so we are doing a lot that is actually doing it in the right way. So the point I want to actually change around is to say that we can't look at this just at the university level. We have to go across the bounds of governance when we start looking at our schools, our community colleges, and the universities, and we have to work together. And we've done a lot of that at the University of Texas at Arlington. So we've reached out to some of our feeder high schools and our independent school districts, and we've set up academies with them. We have a STEM academy, we have 2 teacher academies. These are unique, where there are students who want to be teachers. And so this is a partnership between TCC, that's the community college system, the University of Texas at Arlington, and the ISD, where students who want to be teachers start out in the 9th grade. And as they go forward, they're taking college-level classes as well in the area of education with the hopes that they will actually get a degree in education. Some of them, while they're still in high school, are actually going to finish an associate's degree. Part of this associate's degree is taking classes at the University of Texas at Arlington so they get into the college culture itself and the good parts of it so they have a smooth transition. The first cohort is already at UTA. Just think of the savings that are there and think of the focus that we've managed to put on a student by saying, you can do this while you're in high school. We've paid a lot of attention in terms of dual credit to making sure that the dual credit courses that are offered are of high quality. So just a simple statistic, we had about 1,000 students, slightly more than 1,000 students in our incoming class, it's last year, who came in with a certain number of dual credit, let's say, courses. Taking all those dual credit courses and taking an average across those 1,000 students, if each of those classes had counted, and most of them did, each student saved $6,500 towards the cost of a degree at the university. That can't be done by just saying, they do it over here, then we do it over here, and then we pass it on. It has to be that continuum. And so when we start setting up what's going to work and how do we encourage students, it's that continuum. The last example is something we call Bound for Success, and this is a program we've had in place now for quite a few years. We have a large number of high-achieving students for a variety of reasons. When they finish their 10th grade, they drop out. They want to do other things. They decide that they can make a better living somewhere else. They decide that they want to have some fun. Or, sadly, a lot of them believe that they don't have what it takes academically in order to continue on and actually succeed at the university level, although academically they're highly qualified. And so what we did was, with an agreement with 3 of our feeder ISDs and a couple of other, let's say, schools, is to do something very simple. We took the top 25% of the graduating class in the 10th grade. So at the end of the 10th grade, we said, if you were in the top 25, we would send you a letter that said, you've been admitted to the University of Texas at Arlington. It's signed by me, it's signed by the superintendent, as long as you finish high school. No ifs, ands, or buts, that was the only thing. We know that a high-achieving student is going to continue to be a high-achieving student as long as we can motivate them, as long as we can keep them feeling that this is a future for them. And that's been tremendously successful. Our focus is not on the student that comes to UTA. Sure, I'd love to have all those students come. Our focus is to make sure that those students are motivated in order to go on to college and do it well. And so we actually put advisors in those high schools. And those advisors are there for a very specific reason. It's not just to look at the courses they're taking. It's not just to tell them about the university. It's to help them fill out the FAFSA. It's to talk about a college-going, that's a culture, and to talk to the parents to say that their students can actually make it as well. It's things like this that I believe that we need to do a lot more of in order to address that question, not just for the male African American population, but for our first-generation population, for the population that is struggling because no one else has gone to college, or they are single-parent families. These are those students that we have to reach out across those bounds of governance and make it easy for a student. Because at the end of the day, we have to keep in mind, we're doing this all for a student. We're not doing it for ourselves. We need to make it possible for a student to start out in school, whether it is in the kindergarten level or it's someone coming from a community college to us, to seamlessly move across those bounds. We need to do whatever we can do to make that smooth, and that's what we've been trying to do for the last few years at the university.
I guess if I could weigh in from a community college perspective, I think one of the most transformational things that is going on right now in our sector of 50 community college districts is our work with pathways. And this is at scale. What we are looking at is taking our institutions and building from the high school curriculum into the college curriculum, into the transfer curriculum, into a career. We have a commitment from all 50 community college districts to be engaged in this work, and about half of them have been engaged in this work for the past 3 years and are well on their way. We have the advantage of having private philanthropy backing this, as well as the strength of the Texas Student Success Center that's a part of the community college factor. And this is critically important, is to have that pathway work. It's also critically important, though, that we think about one of the things that you said, and that's the importance of dual credit in this game. If you look at stats, you know that a student in high school taking even just one dual credit course has 138% better odds of attending college than someone who does not. And going back to the opening remarks of the commissioner, I mean, it's a shame that only 53% of our students are attending college after high school, because that huge percentage that's not is very capable of doing so. And we've got to focus on that population if we're ever going to reach the goals of 60 by 30. And I couldn't agree more wholeheartedly that it takes K-12, community colleges, universities, our state agencies, our legislature, all working together. Excuse me. But I think we have the great groundwork for that and a lot of good momentum to build on. But these kinds of changes that are so transformational in nature don't happen overnight. So we're yet to realize the data that's going to come from that as these students progress. It's slow, but it to be done right. It's also methodical, and you just have to stay the course and remember that you can't do it alone. Partnership is at the heart of everything.
I often say that there are two great myths in American higher education that if we addressed and abolished, we would make very significant improvement in student outcomes. The first myth that gets us in a lot of trouble, this applies more to universities and to community colleges, is that in the 3-month period between graduating high school and landing on a college campus, you're magically transformed into an adult. So in higher education, we tell faculty tell students, you need to get some tutoring, and the tutoring services are in such and such a building, and then we think we've done our job by telling them they need tutoring, and turns out that you need to do more than that. That's the intrusive tutoring, intrusive advising. You spot problems and you proactively try to fix them. That's number one. The second great myth that gets us in an enormous amount of trouble is by virtue of getting a PhD, you know how to teach. We have very few faculty at either the community college or the university level know how students retain information. There's been a lot of research on memory over the past 25 years. Cognitive science has grown by leaps and bounds in that time. And the vast majority of faculty members, they still try to get students to remember things with these drill and kill techniques. And there's an abundant fountain of information that shows that's not the way the brain works. We don't give faculty professional development. More than half of faculty didn't teach as graduate students. And if they taught as graduate students, they didn't get any help with how they should teach. I tell people this is a very common experience. When I first started out as an assistant professor of English at UCLA a lot of years ago, when I started out there, I was assigned a faculty mentor. And the faculty mentor took me out to dinner just before the academic year began, and we spent 3 hours over dinner talking about research. He was telling me this is what you have to publish in order to get tenure. This is how you get your manuscript reviewed. He talked about tenure. He talked about research. He never mentioned students once. And so my initial experience in higher education was focus on research, pay less attention to teaching. That's a value that prevails in an awful lot of research universities. We have to return higher education to being student-centered instead of faculty-centered.
I wonder if you also might follow up on one thing that both of the presidents mentioned, which is dual credit. What could the state be doing more of on that front, and how does that help with completion?
Well, I think we have to do a couple of things. First of all, we have to make sure that the dual credit courses are genuinely college-level courses. We have. There are just some things that, and I know that I'm probably the person that has the biggest reservations about what's going on in dual credit. But if you look at the number of students that are taking dual credit, and you compare that to the number of high school students who've demonstrated their college readiness, there's a huge gap. If you look at the percentage of students who take AP courses and pass the AP exams, and you compare that to the number of students who get college credit by taking dual credit courses, there's a huge gap. Those things concern me. I think that the information we have, that the initial stage of expansion of dual credit up until about 2015 was very, very positive. And the data that you cited are mostly in that period. But I think that the acceleration of dual credit has increased enormously in the past 3 or 4 years, and I think we have to make sure that those courses are genuinely college-level courses.
Yes, sir.
So, Tony Edwards, Fort Worth Chamber. I have a question about, I know you talked about a lot of traditional students, but I know at least in Tarrant County, we've got about 290,000 adults that have some college.
Send them all to UTA.
Now, I know you all are working on that. So, but my question is, what more can we do, either through policy or through state agencies or through the institutions, to make these folks that have some college and no degree more of a priority at the state level?
Well, we have an initiative called Grad Texas that's intended to do just that. We have programs in place in about 13 institutions. We want to expand that to all our universities. It's more a problem in universities than it is in community colleges. But we have hundreds of thousands of Texans who have some college credit but have never finished. But I'll tell you one thing we can't do, and we're doing it more than we should, is we can't offer them the same educational experience that forced them out in the first place. You know, you can't tell them, well, come back and sign up for the same course that was taught in a less than lively manner, impose restrictions on students that don't promote their completion. We've got to make sure that if we want them to come back, we've got to offer them a different experience from the one that forced them out to begin with.
Dr. Carbara, your institution has been recognized for its work with adult learners, right? So maybe you can share some
Sure.
lessons
So
learned.
the commissioner is absolutely correct. We can't expect someone who's got a wealth of experience to come back and be treated like an 18-year-old. Approximately 30% of our undergraduates are above the age of 25. And that means what we're doing is actually going out and learning what makes them tick and how do we react to them. They also bring a tremendous amount of experience to every single one of our classrooms. They've worked, they're taking that experience, and when they share it with our younger students, there's a tremendous amount of learning that takes place over there. But the other thing that we've learned is we have to take education to them. We have technology today, and that means we cannot allow ourselves to be constrained by time, space, and location. Just trying to say that you can only take a class that starts on the 16th of January or the 26th of August, which, by the way, is there because we follow the agrarian calendar. Most of us don't work on farms anymore, so those dates really don't mean anything. We have multiple start dates for our online students, and we have multiple lengths of the program itself for our online students, so that a student who is working can pick, within reason, a start date that meets their schedule, and within reason, the length so that it meets their schedule as well. We have a large number of adults who work on shifts. They work the day shift for a certain period of time, and then they work the night shift. Well, just think of what happens to that student when they come for a 15-week semester. The first 5 weeks, they're on the day shift. Everything is fine. They've set it up. The next 5 weeks, they're on the night shift, and guess what? Everything comes to a screeching halt. So what we've been looking at, and we've already put in place, is how do we change the definition of the term? We have to make sure that the teaching is excellent. And we do have a Center for Research on Teaching and Learning that every faculty member takes advantage of, so that our faculty are equipped to do the very best in the classroom or online, as the case may be. But the intent there is to meet the needs of our adult learners where they are and in the situations that they might exist. We've done it very well in terms of the College of Nursing and Health Innovation. We actually award the highest number of degrees in the state of Texas in terms of bachelor's degrees for nurses. And I can assure you that they wouldn't be hired if the chief nursing officers didn't think that they were of the highest quality. And that's why we keep doing that. We're doing it in education. We've just started in the College of Business at the master's degree level so that the working professionals can do it. We're also working with THECB, where we submitted a proposal for adult learners to actually complete the degree while they're still going through an undergraduate degree. And we're really focused on doing exactly what you're talking about so that we can make a way to meet the student where the student exists rather than saying, come to us at a specific point in time at a specific spot.
If I might add, we're using similar strategies with a specific population in our area. We offer a bachelor's degree in industrial management, and as you can imagine, the student that's interested in that program is already working in industry, but their goal is for career mobility, and this allows them to keep their job. It's usually a full-time job, and still attain that bachelor's degree, which then lets them have many more opportunities within their industry. But it's only, and when we first started that, we were dealing with that shift work concept, and we did find that the answer is technology. Often it's a hybrid class where some of the instruction is face-to-face and some is online. Some of them are totally online. But you have to be sure that your faculty have the tools and the support to know how to use that technology effectively. But it's very appropriate for adult learners.
Okay, sir, last question of the panel, I believe.
Thank you. My name is David Wilbanks. I'm trustee-elect in Arlington ISD. And I want to thank Dr. Kavari and UTA and our friends at TCC for a lot of the opportunities they're giving our students, especially first-generation college students, that pathway to success. But as I go around and I talk to professors and administrators in higher ed, and even across the state, we're hearing that there's this epidemic of students ill-prepared for higher ed. So what do we need to be doing, and well, first of all, what do you think the root cause of that is, and what do we need to be doing in public ed in K through 12 to have students better prepared for the college experience?
Great question. Thank you.
So AIST is already doing a lot of it. Because what is happening is that there is a huge amount of collaboration that's going on between teachers in the K-12 space and the college faculty. So we have faculty, for example, who sit with some of your teachers in STEM education areas or in education by itself as a discipline. We've started talking about it in the arts now as to what will be needed in the arts and in languages. So that there are two things that are done. We share the latest that we bring to the table with the teachers. And some of these teachers are exceptional, not just in terms of the dedication, but also the expertise that they bring to the classroom. But the other thing is also we set the expectations. The biggest challenge we have is that gap, that we expect that somebody else automatically knows what the student is going to be expected to do. By sharing these and sitting around the same table, and I wish we had more of these conversations. So my thanks to the Texas Tribune for having this. More of these conversations help us come across those barriers that exist about things that we thought were being done, but somehow were not being done. But a lot more of those conversations where teachers and the faculty at a university would sit together the same way as we're doing with TCC, in terms of having our faculty and faculty at TCC Southeast, for example, for the College of Engineering, they sit together a number of times a year, share the curricula, share what's working, share the grades, figure out this is where the student fell short and these are the expectations. When we know each other's expectations and we know what each other can do, we can do a lot more together. And that's what's going to be needed, is again, working across those bounds of governance, keeping the student in mind, that what we have to do is make sure the student succeeds, and we'll do everything that makes it possible.
I think that we are out of time now, so thank you for that great final question. Thanks again for being here, everyone, and please give a round of applause to our panelists.